Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the test taking workshop in a box. Thank you all for attending this program over Zoom today. Keep in mind that workshops in a box are not videos that you show your students. They are workshops for you to facilitate in your own library. All of our workshops in a box are set up so that once you have seen how we run the workshop, you'll be able to use all the same tools that we used, the PowerPoint, the handouts, the exercises, and then you can run the workshop in your own library. So Kristen is going to run this workshop for you today. You are all Kristen students who are here to learn about test taking. During the recording of the workshop, we'd love for you to ask questions, make comments as if you were a student attending a workshop. I'm also sure that you will have questions about how to teach the workshop. So if you do, we'll ask you to hold those questions to the end so that we have time to debrief and answer those questions at the end of the session. So whether you're here on the Zoom with us or watching the recording, you'll be able to access all of the materials we use today in Canvas. We are going to provide you with instructions for using the workshop in a box, the presentation slides. They'll be available for download, and those slides will have the speaker notes to help you facilitate the workshop in your library. And then any handouts we use in the session will also be in Canvas as well. Although we're running the workshop as a Zoom session, we expect that most libraries will be working with their patrons in person, as workshops are a great way to drive traffic into your library. The resources, questions, and pacing are the same whether you're teaching in person or remotely. So before we start, I'd like to ask if anyone has any questions about your role as a student or about anything else before we start. And if not, we're ready to get started. Please remember to jot down any instructional questions for the end of the session and enjoy being a student learning test taking today. Before I turn it over to Kristen, though, I would like to go over a few housekeeping tips or reminders during this session. So remember that it's an engaging session and we want you to participate. It's helpful to participate because we'll be able to share ideas that way. Have a pen and paper handy for participating in some of the activities. If you're attending by Zoom, please make sure your name is entered correctly in the Zoom. So we need your name and your library in the Zoom to identify yourself. Please mute your phone and headset and raise your hand or chat to ask questions. All right, now let me introduce Kristen Brogy, who is going to present test taking.
Everyone, it is actually a really small group today, so I am quite happy if you stay unmuted or if you call out. That is not a big deal to me at all. Again, I'm Kristen Brogy. I work at the Plainfield Public Library, and I'm really excited to share some test taking tips with everybody. So let's start out with some questions because, I get lonely talking to myself sitting here all the time. So how many of you have ever taken a test? And you can nod, you can raise your hand, you can just say, yes, I have. Yeah. How many of you have ever experienced at least some level of test anxiety? Anybody? I'm seeing lots of nodding, some iffies. Getting nervous about a test is something I think that a lot of us can relate to. Some of us get so anxious about a test that sometimes we can't even pay attention to the test. So we want to talk about things we can do today to help be best prepared for our tests. Because beyond knowing and learning the content that you're being tested on, there is a bit of a skill in test taking, especially standardized test taking. And even if you don't think about it as a skill, we'll talk about some strategies and techniques that are helpful when taking any sort of test or exam. So the first thing I'm going to ask everybody to do is I am going to ask you to do a little pop quiz, so to speak. So it is the first page in your handout. However, I am going to pop it up on the screen for everybody. So I want you all to do this one on your own, just on a piece of paper. Go ahead and take this quick test, and then just let me know when you're done. And if you're done, you can just raise your hand. You can put up a little emoji, whatever you want. Beautiful. I see. It looks like a couple of you are done. And I was so excited to see everybody just staring at the screen and not, trying to do the whole test. So you guys followed the first step. And this is such an important step in taking tests. Read everything. Read everything before doing anything. Make sure you read all of the directions carefully. A lot of times we are just so focused on getting it all done that we start working before we start engaging our brain and thinking about how the test is going to work. So was I correct that everybody actually read the instructions first? I see lots of nodding, and Patty said, I used to do this with my 3rd and 4th grade students. It is one of those things that I think, and especially the beginning of school years, is really important reminder. I still remember when my nephew went to college, one of his first classes, he got a really long test like this. And it said, read everything first. And the last thing was write your name on the top of the paper, hand it in, and leave class. And he did that, and everybody else, he watched how long it took for people to leave class. So obviously a lot of them weren't reading the instructions. So I think it's super important that you make sure you're focused on the instructions as best as possible. All righty, let's go ahead back into our presentation. So as I said, there are some basic strategies and techniques that are really, really helpful when taking any sort of exam. So what we're going to talk about today, and therefore by the end of today's session, you should all be able to, or you will all be able to, identify really good study habits, make a plan that's going to help you manage your study and test time. You're going to be able to use different test-taking strategies based on the types of question and tests. And we're also going to talk about some tips for reducing test anxiety for those of you who do get anxious before taking any sort of a test. We're going to talk so much today about test-taking skills, but even the best test-taking skills are not going to help you unless you know the material you're being tested on. So if you're taking a test and you have not learned the material, you are not setting yourself up for success. So good test taking starts with good study habits. So it means you need to go to the class or attend the workshop or attend the session. You need to read the necessary materials. Make sure that you're doing your homework. Ask questions so that you understand what you've been learning so that you're ready to even start studying for your test. So always attend class. Again, it's where you're going to learn the materials, where you're going to get questions, where you're going to get clarification. Who takes notes when they're in a class or a course? Awesome. Love it. Does anybody ever go back and review those notes? So I see some people, yes, some people no. Patty, you said you don't. Any reason why?
It's not that I don't, it's just that I like to write. However, I don't necessarily need to, or I may not want to go back, but writing the initial time does help me.
Yeah, so we all learn in different ways, and there's different things that are really useful for us. I learned early on that if I took really good notes I often didn't have to go back and review my notes. Or if I took notes and made flashcards, for me, that was enough to not have to study a lot. For other people, there's a lot of memorization involved. So learning what works for you takes time, but it is also a really good test taking skill. Completing your homework assignments, usually that's practicing for the test or ensuring that you understand what you're going to be tested on. So you want to do those. Taking practice tests. Taking practice tests is helpful not only for knowledge recall, but often it's going to give you practice with the type of format of test you're taking. Maybe you're not used to taking a test on a computer, but all of the practice tests are on the computer, so that's going to help you. Taking practice tests, especially if they're at the same location that you're going to take your actual test, being comfortable in that location is helpful. So all of these things are really useful for test taking. So studying and being prepared for a test starts very early. It's not a one-time activity, but it's a long-term habit. You don't want to cram for your tests. That's going to add to your anxiety, and we'll talk about that again in a little while. So as I said, properly preparing is going to put you in control. Preparation and being in control really helps manage your stress level, your anxiety. But how do you do that? It starts out by realistically determining how much time you actually have for studying. And you know, that's going to be different for all of us based on what's going on in our lives, in addition to whatever course we're taking, test we're preparing for. But once you figure out how much time you have for studying, you want to set up a reasonable study schedule. And then you need to make studying a priority. Does anybody have ideas on how to prioritize your studying when you also have an entire life going on as well? Because a lot of us aren't necessarily in high school anymore. And our life isn't focused simply on our learning. So what are some ideas you all have on prioritizing your study? You guys, go ahead, Maria. Thank you. Oh, you're on mute.
All right. I have this like agenda book, and like every day I write down, even if the smallest task, I just need it. Like today, there's like 6 things, very small tasks, but it's something that I know it won't slip my mind.
Wonderful.
So I have an agenda book.
So putting it in writing somewhere,
Yes,
whether it's
yes.
in a calendar, an agenda, maybe on your calendar, on your phone. Or
yeah, phone is not my thing. So
yeah.
I literally have to see it and erase and delete and add. But it's something I could carry with me everywhere.
I am similar in my to-dos. I have a planner that I use, especially at work, that lists things. I already have stuff in my planner for next week that I know I need to do. You know, so keeping, not only knowing what you need to do, but keeping track of it is a great way to help with your study schedule. I saw something in chat. Patty uses audiobooks while doing other things, so you can listen to the content you're learning while you're driving, while you're cleaning house, doing laundry, taking a walk. Does that sound, that's what you're talking about? And then setting a schedule or a time frame to focus is another great one. Yeah, put it.
For me, for studying purposes, I find I have to have no distractions. So I have to find a place and a time where I can totally focus on what it is I'm trying to study or memorize or whatever that may be.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sarah, I'm going to ask you real quick. Can you be in charge of reading chat to us today? Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then in terms of what Sarah just said, it really leads into something that I wanted to talk about. When you come up with your plan, you need to not only plan what you're going to study, as Maria said, when you're going to study it, but also where are you going to study it? where are you going to be when you're doing your studying? Because as Sarah said, Sarah needs to make sure she doesn't have interruptions. So she needs to know where she'll be that maybe she won't be interrupted. But why do you think that you need to put that in your plan? Why isn't it just, oh, I need to study on this day? Why do you want to add when you're going to study, what you're going to study, where you're going to study?
For example,
you're committing to it.
yes. And for example, I'm an Uber mom, so I'm everywhere. So if I'm waiting for practice, dance, whatever, that is my quiet time. And that's when I do my studying, my note taking in my car. That's like my safe space.
Hopefully not while you're driving. Driving and writing is not the best, but
oh, no,
while
no.
you're
But
sitting,
when parked, yes, waiting. Yeah, because I don't, it's pointless to go
yeah.
back home and pick them up. So I just stay there.
So that's great. Other thoughts we've got for making sure we've got our commitment to it. I also find that if I don't know what and where I'm going to study, I waste time because I'm like, okay, there's people in every room in my house right now. So where am I going to go to find my quiet space? Whereas if I say, oh, I'm going to go to the library on Monday and Tuesday at these times, then I've got that already worked out. I know what materials to bring and what to study. So creating a plan and having all the pieces of your plan in place really is useful for making that study plan where you can make it a priority. And then once you have that plan, you need to commit to that plan. I hate to be seen as a failure. So when I make a commitment to things, I tell people about it. I'm going to study this day, and this day every week for the next 4 weeks. If you see me not studying during that time, you need to tell me, hey, Kristen, get with the program. So for me, that commitment, putting it in front of other people makes it much harder for me to, slack off and not honor my commitment. Does anybody have suggestions for that? It's okay if you don't. I just figure any tips we can give each other are very, very helpful. And then the one other thing I want to talk about is not only does studying have to be a priority, but sometimes you might actually have to prioritize among your courses or even within your courses. Sometimes Maria said she's forever all over the place with her kids. So there's times where extra thing gets added to the week and now she can't use that study time. So how do you decide what to focus on? Sometimes you might need to take those shortcuts. So you want to be strategic. Maybe you want to focus on, okay, I can't do all the reading, but we were given vocabulary or terminology. And I'm just going to read that. And then hopefully I'll know enough. Or maybe you get practice tests. Take the practice test, see what you don't know. That way you know what you have to focus on. So you can skip over bits and pieces. So sometimes not only is making study a priority, but sometimes you've got to prioritize within your studying. All right. And I don't know if you ever heard the quote. It's originally credited to Alexander Graham Bell. It's preparation is the key to success. So we've talked about it a little bit. In the months, the weeks, the days before your test, you want to make sure you're using your good study habits. You're not cramming, you're learning everything. That way, the night before the test, you're not cramming, you're just going to get a good night's sleep. And then the day of the test, you'll be calm, well rested, hopefully eaten well so that you're ready to go take the test. So we've talked about good study habits, and it takes a long time to develop good study habits. So you want to start practicing, figuring out what works best for you as you're starting in a course, not at the end of a course. Again, cramming. Cramming is for a test is actually really counterproductive. You are less likely to retain the information you need if you try to learn it the night before the test. Usually it increases stress. It negatively impacts your sleep. People who say, oh, I want to pull an all-nighter before this test so I'm ready, you're going to be less ready than if you got a good night's sleep. So you want to avoid that temptation and start with your good study habits instead. The night before the test, not only do you want to get that good night's sleep, gather up all your materials. Figure out where you're going. Make a plan for the next day. If you're going somewhere at 8 a.m. To take a test, probably you got to wake up early. The last thing you want to do is find everything you want for breakfast. Gather up your number 2 pencils if you need pencils. You want to make sure you've got everything ready the night before, including figuring out how long it's going to take you to get to the test. So you want to make sure the night before that you're preparing every single thing you can so that the day of the test, that stuff is all ready for you. Eating healthy. I know everybody says it, but just like sleeping, eating is a really important part of self-care and test-taking preparation. It's really hard to think clearly if your stomach is growling. And as tough as it can be to eat when you're feeling really nervous, or if you're rushing out the door, that's why you want to make sure you're planning time the morning of your test to have a healthy breakfast. Maybe plan even what you're going to have as your healthy breakfast. Also think about your coffee intake. I know that I need a couple cups of coffee to be able to function in my life. But if I over caffeinate myself, I get jittery. I will admit it, it takes a lot, but I do get jittery. So, and I also wind up having to run to the restroom a bunch of times, which you might not be able to do during a test. So you want to think through all of these things. For me, a good healthy breakfast that keeps me full, I love oatmeal, and I mix some peanut butter in it. So I've got, protein in it. Those are the things that are helpful. Definitely avoid those high sugar. Yeah, if I crammed all night, I want Pop-Tarts and I want Mountain Dew. Those are my college breakfasts. Yeah. Sarah's making faces at me. But then you crash. So you want to think about what's going to give you energy and keep you full. Does anybody else have good breakfast suggestions? I bet Sarah does. Sarah's a nice healthy eater.
I eat the same thing every day for breakfast, an English muffin and my coffee. That's it. I'm not a good breakfast eater. I never was.
See, I would add some peanut butter to that English muffin, which by the way, melted peanut butter on an English muffin is so good. Anybody else?
Well, I gotta say, I know the coffee thing that always affects me. I work differently with tea. Tea, I don't get all the jitters and everything from, but coffee.
But it helps.
I know I can't have coffee before something very important.
With caffeine, it's not just the jitters. I find if I drink too much of it, I become completely distracted. I can't focus on anything. So you got to know your body. You know.
Yep. Good things to know about yourself so that you know how to prepare. Arrive early. Again, yeah, it stinks waking up early, but once you're there early, parked in the parking lot, you're not stressed about, am I going to be late? What if I can't find the room? Where hopefully there's going to be a good seat. I can't sit next to the window because I will sit and stare out the window. All of those things, and obviously you can tell I've dealt with a little anxiety in my life, but all of those things that are going to help give me the time to be settled and ready for the test is really, really important. And then the last one on our test prep checklist is positive rituals. Don't underestimate how being calm can help you feel a bit more confident. Does anybody have sort of positive rituals, things you do that either help you calm down or build your confidence? Go ahead, Maria. I'd love to hear it.
So that I usually arrive early to all these things, so I could find good parking, and then at least have a few minutes, like 10 minutes, just to like meditate and just like relax and like just good vibes, good thoughts, and plus and I need to sit in the front, so that's another thing I need to. That's my thing. I need to find a front seat. But no, I kind of just in the morning arrive early, sit in the car, and just listen to some yoga music, or even or just like the ocean, the rain, like that. I like putting that in the background, so it just kind of calms me.
Very calm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. Anybody else? I love like loud music I can sing to, especially if I'm driving somewhere where I'm really nervous about going, because then I'm not thinking about what I'm nervous about. So I love using loud music. I like to sort of take my mind off my worries. I am also a deep breather. So everybody who works with me knows that I am a big fan of deep breathing. Anything that works for you. And you might need to try out a few things to decide.
Breathing is good, but Xanax is better. Only kidding.
Depends on how much you got to focus on your test. But yeah, you got to do what you need to do to be able to calm down and build your confidence. So let's say we've done all of our studying, we've done all of our rituals before the test, we've eaten well, we've arrived early, we slept well. There are still other tips for doing well on your tests. And this is not necessarily going to work for every single test, because lots of different tests work differently. You know, you don't necessarily approach a test with an essay on it the same way you're going to approach standardized tests like an SAT or a GED. But these are general strategies that you can use. So the first one is to listen to the instructions or read all of the instructions. Sometimes when a test is put in front of you, all you want to do is block out everything and start. And sometimes blocking it all out and starting doesn't help unless you hear the instructions first. It's going to give you information about the test sometimes. Will you get marked off if an answer is incorrect versus blank? You know, there's some tests where you're not going to get a point off for leaving it blank, but you will if you get it incorrect. You might want to listen for how long I have to take this test. All the different things that will be useful for you. Are you allowed to use scrap paper? You're going to get all of that information in the instructions, so pay attention. If it's possible, if you're allowed, read the whole test first. Doing that just gives you an idea of the structure of the test. What areas do you think you might need to focus on? You know, figuring out how much time you have to do each part. Once you've read the whole test, or maybe even beforehand, if you're allowed to do this, do a brain dump. You know, I personally struggle with memorization. So sometimes I'll try to focus on those 5 points I need to remember as I'm walking into the test. If I'm allowed to then, when the test starts, write that information down before it falls out of my brain, that's great to have on a piece of paper in front of you if you're allowed. So jot down any facts, dates, formulas, anything that might be helpful for you when you're taking the test. Again, if that is allowed. Answer the questions you know. Whoops, I've got this backwards, I think. Well, let me say, answer the questions you know first. That way you get the easy ones out of the way quickly. You don't want to rush through it. You want to focus on what you're doing, but answer what you know first. Then go ahead and answer the questions you skipped. When you skip questions, sometimes when you're going through the rest of the test, it may jog your memory. It may get you an answer on your test that you thought you didn't know when you were first going through it. So you want to go through, answer what you know, answer what you skipped, make sure you've completed the test, look at everything, see, did I leave anything blank? Should I have left it blank? Did I forget to flip the page over and look at the back and answer the questions on the back? So make sure that if you've left anything blank, you've done that on purpose. And then once you've made sure your test is complete, check your work. You're not going through it to redo everything, but just check it. Make sure it makes sense. Make sure that if it's an essay, even if you're just reading through it for, grammar, spelling, if you have a rubric, a list of things you're supposed to have covered, make sure you did cover all of those points. You're not trying to overthink your answers. You're just trying to correct any obvious mistakes. Any questions, comments on my general test taking tips? Anything anybody would add? All right. So then let's move on to some very specific techniques. We talked about reading the test before you take it. You also want to read the question, and then you want to read it again. It's really important that you've read the question and that you understand what you're being asked and how you should respond to it. So I'm going to ask somebody to read this question out loud to us so that we can all answer it. Who wants to read to me?
I'll read it.
Thanks, Colleen.
Okay. You are driving a bus. The bus is empty when you begin your route. At the first stop, 3 people get on. At the second stop, 9 people get on and 2 get off. At the third stop, 4 people get off and 2 get on. What color are the bus driver's eyes?
What color? Colleen.
Green.
All right. Patricia. Patty. Sorry, I read your name. I'm like,
Brown.
right. So it says you are driving the bus. So for some of us, as Colleen was reading the question, we were doing the math. And yes, I do math on fingers. And then we were so focused on the math that when she got to the part that said, what color are the bus driver's eyes? And of course, my bus driver has sunglasses, so you can't tell. It threw us. And if you feel thrown, read the question again. Focus on the stuff that maybe isn't that important. And so that's why you want to read and then read it again. And if you got to, read it a third time. Questions on this one? I'm thinking no. More question reading tips, and I'm just going to pop each of these up for you really quickly. The handout packet that you have has this information in it as well. Bold, special type, italicized. Usually that information is important, so you want to pay attention to it. When you're looking at multiple choice questions, always look for if it's telling you how many answers you should select. Multiple choice isn't always just one answer. Some questions really do have more than one answer, so you need to know how many you can select. If you're struggling, go ahead and think about which answers can you eliminate before you then have to choose from a couple maybe you're not sure is the right one. If you are or check if the question is asking you select the right answer or the wrong answer. Always make sure that you reread the question when you're done so that you've done all of the steps that the question has asked you to complete. And then one other really good tip is if you can't answer a question, skip over it, because then you're not spending all of your time on a question you don't know. Go ahead and try to do the rest of the test, the rest of the questions you know, and then go back to this one. So if you skip a question, sometimes computerized tests will allow you to mark things for review. Other times you might want to circle it if it's a written test or jot down the question number. So you want to just make sure you have a way to get back to those questions. Okay, so let's look at this sample test question and see all of the things we need to notice in the question in order to be able to answer it correctly. Can somebody else read for me?
Can read?
Yes, please.
Climate change is a pressing issue that affects us all. It is caused by the release of greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere. These gases trap heat from the sun, causing the planet's temperature to rise. This increase in temperature can lead to more extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and other negative impacts on our environment. So the question, shall I continue? The
Sure.
question is, which of the following are negative impacts of climate change on our environment? Select 2.
So then we look at the answers. Increased use of fossil fuel, more frequent droughts, higher crop yields, increased availability of fresh water, melting ice caps. None of those specifically were in the question. In the text. So what we need to do is figure out keywords that will help us determine what are the correct answers. So when you look at the question, which of the following are negative impacts of climate change? Well, we know the whole text is about climate change. So what about climate change are we looking for in the text? What are the keywords in the question? Which of the following are negative impacts of climate change on our environment? Any guesses?
It mentioned increase, so that's like one. I would say that's one.
Before we look, Maria, before we look at the answers, just look at the question.
Okay.
So look at the question is, which of the following are negative impacts of climate change on the environment? In the question, we know the article is about climate change.
So I would think of negative as bad. So
Okay.
bad things happen, like something
Correct.
like bad.
That's what we want to look at, the negative impacts of climate change. So now when we go in and we look at the question, the answers, we can find out which one of these are negative. So it takes sometimes a lot of thinking about the question as opposed to just rereading. I'm pointing over here because on my screen, the question is over here, instead of rereading the question over and over again and going, none of these are said in here. Okay, so can anybody decide which of the answers is a negative impact of climate change?
I think both B and E are negative impacts, right?
Wonderful. Are we allowed to put 2 answers?
Well, they're asking for 2.
Perfect. And these are the ways you want to think about when you answer the question. Sarah's like, I know B and E are both negative. But what if it's asking only for 1? Or what if maybe it asked for 3 and we would have to come up with all 3? So you want to look at the question. You want to read it carefully. You want to identify what the question is truly asking for. And then you want to make sure that you do all of the parts that are asked. So we were asked to answer 2. Does this make sense? Questions on this? Wonderful. So this is what we're going to start focusing on when we're taking tests. Here are some decision-making strategies when you are, especially with a multiple choice, but also decision-making on sort of anything you're doing on a test. We're going to talk right now about parsing, satisficing, and process of elimination. And yes, the first time I heard all of these, process of elimination I'd heard of, but I needed to look up both parsing and especially satisficing. So parsing is breaking down a block, breaking down something into smaller bits. So in this case, it's breaking down the data, the information that we're being given, the question, into smaller parts so we can focus on one thing at a time. So identifying keywords and key phrases in our question, looking at clues. Remember that, something that is in capital or has the first letter of the word in uppercase, That's a noun. That's a proper name. It's something, you know, if you don't know anything about the question, go, oh, but that says that Oscar, and I can then look at that information. You know, so you really want to focus on all the different pieces. Parsing is also really useful for taking a complex multi-part question and breaking it down into smaller parts and focusing on one part at a time. So it allows you as a test taker to answer each part separately and make sure that you didn't forget what you were supposed to do. As a concept, does this make sense? Fabulous. Satisficing. Satisficing essentially is, okay, what is maybe not the best solution, but something that is good enough. Sometimes you use this particular strategy, satisficing, when you're running low on time on a test. What can I do to get things to the point where they're good enough? Sometimes it's also considered choosing a solution that maybe isn't the perfect one, but again, close enough to what I think is the right answer. And then decision-making strategy called process of elimination. Has anybody ever used process of elimination on a test? All the time. Hopefully it's an educated guess. Sometimes it's just, if I have a bunch of multiple choice, I'm going to get rid of all the wrong ones, and I usually am left with the right answer. So we're going to dig into these a little bit. So here's our first exercise. We've got this really complex math problem. Colleen has 10 apples. She gave 5 apples, or I'm sorry, I read it wrong. She gave 8 apples to her friend Sarah. After that, she bought a bag of 12 apples from the store. She gave 3 apples to her favorite teacher. How many apples does Colleen have now? Some of us might be able to do this math in our head. Some of us have always, in my entire life, struggled with math. And so for me, breaking it down into the smallest piece really, really, really does help me when I need to do it. So what is the first piece of information we need to start with to come up with an answer? What are we going to start with if you're trying to figure out this problem?
I'm going to start with the question so I know what I'm working on.
Very good. So what are you working on?
We're going to find out how many apples Colleen has at the end of all of her transactions.
Okay. And then with all the information we've given, what's the first piece of information we would start with?
She has 10.
Beautiful. Colleen has 10 apples. If it were me, I would have to write down the number 10 because when I start reading more, I lose track of the numbers. So the next thing we need to do is the next thing we read is that Colleen gave 8 apples to Sarah. So how do we figure out how many apples Colleen has left?
Just
Subtract 8 from 10.
Exactly. So 10 minus 8 is 2. So we know she now has 2 apples. Do you need me to continue explaining how to break down this question? Okay. So working in smallest pieces will eventually get us to the answer. Hold, please. Oh, I went way ahead. Oh, Colleen has 11 apples. I can't believe I didn't put the answer in the slide presentation. And the first time I wrote the presentation, I put the wrong answer in. So luckily I checked my work. No, I'm not lying to you. I completely messed it up and I don't even remember what I did wrong, but I checked my work because I know I struggle with math. It's just one of those things. But using that parsing to make a test question easier for you when it has more than one part is really useful. Don't focus on the big picture. Start with what you need to know, start with the information you've got, and move on from there. Satisficing. Again, this is a great strategy to use if you're running out of time on a test or if you just don't know all the answers. Even if you don't know all the answers, as long as it's a test where you can get credit for the parts you do correctly, you might want to go ahead and just do the best that you can. So the assignment on this says you're going to recreate this spreadsheet below. You need to include all of the numbers, the titles, all of the data. You want to format this spreadsheet, and then you want to create the same 3D bar chart. So let's assume that for the sake of this example, you do know how to create the spreadsheet and you know how to do the formatting, but you have no idea how to write formulas. Satisficing is doing good enough. It's better to do the part that you know than to leave the whole thing blank. So if you only know how to type in the information, how to make the top blue, you know, how to put dollars, whatever formatting you know how to do the best you can. You might even, like, if you know enough about spreadsheets, you could look at this and go, oh, even if I don't have these formulas, I can create the chart from it, you know, so do the best you can. Does that make sense? For a lot of people, looking at a test question that you already know you don't know how to do the whole thing, really, really panics them. And so reminding yourself, good enough is good enough is fine. It'll get you partway through the test. Satisficing is also a skill one of my children learned at a very young age, because when I was in school, we did not get rubrics for this is how I'm going to grade you on your test. Has anybody seen test rubrics or homework rubrics for either themselves or their kids? I see Patty nodding. A rubric essentially is an evaluation tool or a set of guidelines for it promotes sort of the consistent application of the learning expectations. I am going to tell you what I expect on this. I'm setting the objectives, the standards, and then I am measuring what you've done based on the rubric so that I can know what grade you're going to get. Okay. And Patty said,
Patty says they start teaching in kindergarten. How do you do that?
Even with like good coloring, like what's a good picture? I give them like a 1-star scribbles, a 2-star more in the lines, and then a 3-star would be like lots of colors. Your tree is green and brown, not purple, like those sort of things. So we start teaching them early on, like this is your criteria, and to get a good score, this is what we expect from you. So it starts off with pictures. It's very simple, good penmanship, and we display and model the expectations, and essentially that's a rubric.
And so I recommend, if you're running out of time on a test, or let's say even if you're in a class and life is getting in the way, do good enough. It's better than nothing. My darling child learned that if I focus on the good column versus the excellent column, I don't have to work as hard and I'll still get an okay grade. And that was how he lived his life in school, but which I don't love, but good and get the best you can. So this is it is a test taking tip. You don't have to get an A+ on everything, especially if it's going to increase your stress, it's going to increase your anxiety, it's going to make the rest of your life difficult when you're studying for or writing an essay, but you've also got a full-time job and 4 kids and an unwell grandparent, or so, do the best you can to get everything taken care of in life. So that's satisficing. Process of elimination, I think we all know this one, but it's really important and a really useful tool. and that's before answering a question. You want to focus or eliminate as many of the wrong choices as possible. I find that unless when I read a test question and I know what the answer is supposed to be before I even look at my options, I always start with a process of elimination. Otherwise, I read them all and then hopefully the answer I thought was right is in there. So here's our example for process of elimination. Which of the following is not a primary color? So who can tell me which ones we would eliminate? Which is not a primary color? You're on mute, Patty.
Green.
Green is not a primary color. Anybody else know the other primary colors? Or I'm sorry, I just said that.
Only one
So wrong.
non-primary color here.
Yes.
Right.
So the ones we would eliminate are red, blue, and yellow because those are our primaries. And Patty, I just went with you. Wait, red, blue. Yeah, yellow and blue make green. So
Yes.
red, blue, and yellow are our primary colors. So we eliminate the primaries and we get Patty's answer of green because Patty used my others, which was, let me see if I know the answer before I read the parts or the options. So I did a horrible job sort of showing it, but does it make sense how you would do this? Beautiful. Here's another one. And this one, we need to figure out which of these books is nonfiction. You've probably not read these books. So how are you going to start eliminating the right answer? Or how are you going to start eliminating books so that you can get to the closest possible answer? Any thoughts on which books you could eliminate nonfiction?
Well, I would first eliminate the golden book, knowing that they're usually not. What is that one? My Little Golden Book of Dogs.
Okay, so you're eliminating, you're using your own knowledge and eliminating because golden books tend to be stories. Also, typically you don't see three dogs hanging out wearing t-shirts, one of them standing on their back paws. Like it very much looks like a story. Okay, so we got rid of C. Other thoughts?
I'd probably get rid of D also because it looks like it's, a story being told by the dog himself.
Perfect. Yes. So now we've gotten rid of the bottom two. Thoughts on the top two? So we've got portraits with a picture of a dog and the dog. Why do dogs love to sniff? Any guesses? This is hard.
I think they both look like nonfiction to me. So portraits is probably pictures of dogs.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And why do dogs love to sniff? I think it's probably, some interesting information about why they like to smell things. So I would think they're both nonfiction. I don't know if I'm right, but that's.
But what if you have to pick only one? Any thoughts? Here's my train of thought behind it. I know that why do dogs love to sniff? The do's and don'ts of the dogs. Like this is telling me facts about dogs. So that's definitely in my mind, nonfiction. I could be wrong, but facts about dogs means it's not fiction. So to me, that's my nonfiction. Portraits, if portraits is just pictures, is a picture book nonfiction? Like, does it fall into that category?
Good question.
So because I'm not sure portraits is nonfiction, but I'm certain that facts about dogs is nonfiction, that's why I would choose B. So you're still using your process of elimination, prior knowledge, but having less to explain about. Like, yes, pictures of dogs in real life could be considered nonfiction, but facts about dogs, I know, is nonfiction. So we might get the answer wrong. Honestly, I have no idea. I just looked up pictures of dog books so that I could put in this question. So I don't know what the right answer is, but it's a good example of how are you going to eliminate things in the test questions. Questions on this? Has anybody read these books? Wants to give it? No, I'm kidding. All righty. Other things that are important. Learn to manage your time. Test taking under time conditions can be really stressful. Sometimes we get so absorbed in the test that we're unaware of how much we're spending on each question. Also, how much time might be left. So time awareness is a skill in test taking. It does take some practice. So what you always want to start, or what you want to start thinking about when you're working on test taking, is you want to start thinking about how much time do I have? And then think about your threshold and your reservoir. Threshold is the maximum amount of time you can use per question. And then the reservoir would be the leftover time at the end to review your questions. So for example, if you have an hour to answer 30 questions, how long can you spend on each question? You have 1 hour, 60 minutes to answer 30 questions. Do you think you can spend 2 minutes on each question? Patty does. Great. 2 minutes per question. Anybody else have other thoughts? You've heard me make how many mistakes talking during this presentation, reading the wrong numbers, etc. If I spend 2 minutes on each question, I will not have time to review everything. And I know I need to go back and look at what I wrote and make sure that I did it or I said it right. So I would give myself maybe a minute per question. That way I've got another minute per question to review my answers. So when you're taking a test, you want to think about how is it that you focus on your tests? What is it that you do on your tests as well? Thanks, Maria. Take care. So when you're thinking about timing on your tests, always think about that bit of information as well. How long do you need to review, and how much time can you spend on each test? Test anxiety. So we've talked about it a bunch of times. One of the important things to know is that if you're nervous about taking a test, don't focus on the nervousness. Use that nervousness to prepare better. So the second you start getting nervous thinking about a test that you're going to take, start studying for it then. So if you're sitting in class and you hear, oh, you're going to have to take a test at the end of 3 weeks, study a little bit every day, because if you're getting nervous at the beginning, use that nervousness. It really will motivate you to prepare better. If you do find yourself paralyzed by test anxiety, remind yourself that you've been preparing. So if you've been preparing your test for the test, you can say to yourself, wait, I prepared. I gave myself all of the tools I needed to pass this test already. So I don't need to have this anxious feeling that I'm having. We talked about deep breaths. Relax before the exam. Find that time to take some deep breaths or try out meditation. During the exam, if you find yourself getting really anxious and stressed out, take a couple minutes even then. You can close your eyes, stop thinking about your test, start breathing so that it calms yourself enough that you can focus on the test again. Practicing self-confidence. Again, I said, remind yourself, you studied for this test. That means you have to study for the test. But if you then can remind yourself you studied, you can fake the confidence of believing that you know it all, because really you do. You're just anxious because tests for some people stink. And then, you know what? If you fail the test, but you've tried your best, you've learned about the test enough to be able to study for it and try it again. So I'm going to tell you that sometimes failing a test is not the worst thing in the world. I also want you to consider every test you take and every time you study, practice. You want to analyze your performance after each test. Determine whether your test taking strategies really do work for you. Think about where you struggled. Are you struggling with essay questions? Practice writing essays. Are you struggling with multiple choice questions? Practice some of those skills instead. Meeting with instructors to talk about low test scores. Instructors can help you figure out how to improve your test scores as well. So you want to think about all of those things even after you've taken your test. So in summary, we're going to go through our quick key points. Relax. Think about your time. Guessing answers is okay. Ways to help you guess better. Process of elimination. If you're stuck and you're close to the end of your time, we talked about using our best judgment or the answer that requires the least amount of explanation for why you think it's right. So think about, I don't know if picture books are in fact nonfiction, but I know that facts are nonfiction. So that one has very little explaining. That's why we chose that answer. And then always try to mark the question that you need to review so that if you've got time left, you can go back and review it. So these are just a quick summary of different test taking skills we've talked about. Does anybody have any questions on test taking? All righty. Does anybody have any questions on, now I'm talking to you as if you are instructors who are going to be teaching a test taking session, questions on how you might teach this or things you want to know about it? I have such a quiet group now. Wonderful. So you guys are going to have like rock star test taking sessions. We've listed here all of the different workshops in a box that are available to you all through our Canvas site. So you can definitely take a look at those if there's another session that you want to teach. And I just want to thanks everybody. Thank you so much for taking part in my test taking session.
Thank you, Kristen. This was very helpful.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank you,
Sarah. I'm
Kristen.
so glad.